We're very fortunate to be joined by Thom Hartmann, midday host here at WCPT, Sirius XM Freedom TV, Twitter Live star. He's on every platform. And he is going to be with Richard Chu doing a live panel next Wednesday, the 9th. He is also going to be making some bookstore appearances in the area because he has a new book out, The Hidden History of the American Dream. Thom, how are you?
Hey, Joan. Great talking with you again. It's just been a couple of weeks.
I know. You know, I've started watching you on Twitter Live. I didn't even know that you were on that particular platform. You really, these days, if you want to get this kind of democratic, progressive message out, in the words that have become a cliche, you kind of have to go where the people are, don't you? Yeah.
The ones we haven't figured out yet that we really need to are TikTok and Instagram. I mean, we have a presence there, but we haven't really professionalized it. But yeah, you're right. But you know, I still love old-fashioned radio, and I'm so glad to be on WCPT. I think, you know, people driving in their cars or sitting at home listening to the radio. That's where I started, and that's where I'm going to plant my flag till the day I die.
I know what you mean. It's such a, well, you know, maybe not everybody views it this way, but it feels to me like it's such a vibrant medium. There's an immediacy, there's an intimacy to radio that I really like.
Yeah, I used to make the analogy that when I was teaching, media or advertising and marketing and PR, is that television is like voyeurism. It's like, you know, you're sitting in your living room looking through your picture window into somebody else's house. Whereas radio is like a phone call. It's your friend talking in your ear. You know, it's immediate. It's right there. And the mediums are very, very different. Television is very cold. Radio is very hot or warm. Yeah, absolutely.
I always enjoy your books, but I particularly enjoyed in this new book, Hidden History of the American Dream, The Demise of the Middle Class and How to Rescue Our Future. I think at some point you've just simply decided to be very straightforward in the way you label your chapters. For instance, one chapter is, for the next time some idiot tries to tell you the GOP is the party of business. I love that because, you know, let's not sugarcoat it. Let's not, you know, try to say, well, we're going to refute these economic arguments. No, because it drives me crazy. Because as I'm sure you hear and I hear, well, you know, Trump was really good for the economy. Republicans are really good for the economy. No, actually, that's not the case. Talk about that chapter,
Jimmy Carter
if you would.
Did better. Yeah, Jimmy Carter did better than Donald Trump did on the economy. Well, you know, the bottom line is the Republican Party are, you know, they reflect the desires and needs of the billionaire class, and to some extent the very, very large corporations that make the billionaire class. And in particular, the fossil fuel industry, although there are a few other industries that, you know, the health insurance industry, the banking industry, the drug industry, that are all also basically, you know, own large chunks of the Republican Party and to whose tune the Republican Party dances. But, you know, the bottom line is that the GOP is not the party of business. Because you know, they're basically the party of predators. And those predators do not help business in general. They may help some small number of businesses, but not business. And they certainly don't help the American middle class. They're destroying the American dream, in fact. So.
Well, I spend the first hour of the show just reading texts and taking calls, and I got a text from a truck driver who said he was dictating it with hands-free while he was driving. And he was like, well, you know, Trump and Vance are my guys, are going to win. And my question was, why are they your guys? If you're a Teamster truck driver, do you think Donald Trump is going to be good for your union or any union? If you're not a member of a union, you're just a middle-class guy, do you think that he is going to be good for you economically, that he's not going to use people like you and me to squeeze us more so that there will be more tax cuts for the billionaire class? I don't understand that whole mindset that I've heard before from rank and file, from unions, that somehow Donald Trump is their guy. Where does that come from, Tom, and how do we get them away from it?
Well, if you hate black people, Donald Trump's your guy. If you hate Muslims, Donald Trump's your guy. If you hate Hispanics, Donald Trump's your guy. If you think that men should have free license to rape women whenever they want to, and not suffer any consequences from it, Donald Trump's your guy. If you think that gay people should stay in the closet, Donald Trump's your guy. Generally speaking, if you're an ass, forgive the phrase, Donald Trump's your guy. I don't know how else to say it. I mean, what did Trump do for truck drivers? Absolutely nothing.
No.
Trump doesn't want them to have unions. In fact, he was when he was being interviewed by Elon Musk a couple of weeks ago, he said, "Boy, I really admire." I'm paraphrasing here. You can find the exact words online, but he said, "Boy, I really admire how you fire people when they try to start a union." He says they just say, "I want a union," and you just fire them. I mean, he was very impressed by that. He has never allowed unionization within his own organizations or his own companies. Maybe he was forced to with the casinos. I don't know, frankly, but we know that Trump hates unions. We know that Trump screws average working people. There's over 3,500 small businesses, truck drivers, by the way, delivery services, and construction workers, contractors who have sued Donald Trump for refusing to pay them, which means that there's probably another 10,000 out there who just shrugged their shoulders and said, "Screw it, it's not worth it." Because you can't, you sue Donald Trump and he'll just sue you back, and then it costs you more than if you'd gotten the money from him. I had a guy who did much of the cabinet work in one of his casinos in New Jersey, call into my program last year, and he said that Donald Trump owed him $135,000, maybe it was $185,000, and he said he looked into suing him to get it, and his lawyer reached out to Trump's lawyers, and Trump's lawyers said, you should be happy that you were able to put in your advertising and on your resume that you worked in a Trump property. There's $135,000 worth of prestige there. And by the way, if you sue us, we will sue you back, and it will cost you more than $135,000 to defend yourself against our frivolous lawsuit. So, I can't vouch for the veracity of that claim, but, that's basically what the guy said. That's a story
from other folks I've heard over and over again. In one of his properties, there was a company that was hired to install chandeliers, and Donald Trump's business refused to pay the bill. Only the story, as it was published in New York, that guy brought his employees back. They took all the chandeliers out and they left with them. But not everybody can do that.
Yeah, for sure. So anybody who, when somebody tells you that Donald Trump is their guy, what they're telling you is that they're basically a racist, misogynistic ass, or they're just pathetically uninformed. I mean, it's just I don't see any other alternative.
It does seem like we've gotten to this point. Why did you decide to write this particular book now?
Because the American middle class has been under assault for half of my lifetime, and I was born in 1951, so I saw this country become a middle class country in the 1950s and 60s, and then I saw Ronald Reagan come into office in 1981 and deconstruct the middle class. I start the book out with, in the introduction, talking about how when my generation was in our 30s and 40s in the late 80s, early 90s, we controlled 21% roughly of the national wealth, of the entire GDP of the United States. We controlled about 21% of all the country's money. Now, the generation that is in their 30s and early 40s control around actually less than 5%, 4.6% of the nation's wealth. So we've seen this almost fourfold reduction in the wealth held by the American middle class. Where did that money go? It went to the top 1%. It went to the billionaire class. $51 trillion transfer of wealth, 100% of it the result of Republican policies, principally tax cuts like Donald Trump's tax cut, George Bush's tax cut, and Ronald Reagan's tax cuts, but also the hostility of all three of those administrations to unions. Donald Trump put Anthony Scalia's son in charge of the Labor Department. This is a guy who made his living busting unions. I mean, you've got a guy who hates labor, organized labor, in charge of the Labor Department. That's Donald Trump, right? So anyhow, what we're seeing, and arguably this started out with good intentions. I think the whole Republican destroy the middle class thing that started in the 80s really, you can reach back, and I think you and I may have discussed this in the past, Joan, because I've written about it before. Back in 1951, Russell Kirk published this book, The Conservative Mind, in which he said, in 51, we were on our way to becoming the first democracy in the world where 50% of the people in the country were living in the middle class. We weren't quite there yet, but we were getting there. And Russell Kirk was saying, look out. If the middle class gets too large, in fact, the subtitle of his book was From Burke to Eliot. That's Edmund Burke to T.S. Eliot, two famous conservatives. But Edmund Burke, around the time of the American Revolution, was a British conservative. And he, famously defended England's maximum wage laws. They had laws in England at that time that said that employers couldn't pay more than a certain amount because they didn't want a middle class to emerge, because they were afraid that if a middle class ever emerged, those people are not educated, they didn't come from wealth, they have no experience in governance, and they'll just screw the country up. And so you want to keep the poor poor. And so anyhow, Russell Kirk said, if the middle class ever gets too large, basically what you're going to see is young people no longer respecting their elders, women no longer knowing their place in society and no longer respecting their husbands, and racial minorities and religious minorities, demanding equality with white Christians, basically. I mean, I'm being a little more blunt in my language than he was. And when he published that book in 51, most Republicans just didn't take it seriously. They thought he was a crackpot, except for William F. Buckley and Barry Goldwater. They got all excited about it. But then the 60s happened, and you had the birth control pill and the women's movement. You had the civil rights movement hitting its peak, and in fact, in some cases, after King's murder, burning our cities, and you had young men saying, hell no, I'm not going to go to Vietnam. And Republicans looked around and said, holy cow, Russell Kirk was a prophet. And so when Reagan came into office in 81, his mandate was to destroy or cut down the size of the middle class. At that time, the middle class was 2/3 of us when Reagan came into office. And he was successful. It's only 43% of us now. So and to stay in the middle class now, you have to have two incomes, whereas when Reagan came into office, you do it with one income. So there's that fourfold reduction in wealth. They reduced the number of people in the middle class, and then they doubled the number of people working that it takes to stay in the middle class. And most Americans have no idea that this happened. They know that they've been screwed. They're not sure how or by whom. So I wanted to write a book that would lay it out.
Yeah. And part of that is not only keep them down economically, but keep them ignorant. You write a whole chapter on why public schools are on the GOP hit list. Talk about that.
Yeah, Republicans have, I should say conservatives. I mean, again, this goes back to Edmund Burke, who was no fan of public education. And Republicans have long believed that, having a class of uneducated poor people is actually a good thing for society. That poverty is a good thing for society. We have out of the 34 OECD countries, the most developed countries in the world, we have the worst poverty problem, and it's because of this conservative belief that if you keep large numbers of people in poverty, what you are doing is you are providing a desperate labor force who are willing to work for low wages. And this is why when you look at blue states, the democratically controlled states, you see average wages in the starting wages of $20 an hour. I mean, in a lot of places you've got a minimum wage of $15 to $20 an hour in a lot of cities and states. Whereas, and people, a lot of people living in the middle class and being quite prosperous. On the other hand, when you look at the red states, the Republican-controlled states, they're pretty much across the board. I mean, Montana might be the exception to this, but by and large, what you see is just enormous amounts of poverty. And this is the way that the Republicans want it. It's not, people say, well, why don't they do something about the poverty? Well, what that poverty does is it produces people who are willing to work in a factory for $13 an hour, and will not try to unionize, particularly because the red states are all right to work for left states, so it's even harder to unionize anyway, and to keep a union. So, it's pretty straightforward stuff.
I want to know one of your chapters. I want to sign up to help make this happen. I don't know if we do like a change.org petition or pass some laws. I believe Congress members should wear NASCAR patches. I think there should be a jacket with all of the patches for all of the people who are funding them, and they have to wear it. If not on the actual floor, at least if they come out to the microphones to do television or internet interviews. I like this idea. Let's make them show us with their clothing who's buying them, who's paying for them.
Yeah, here's a funny story. Lewis Powell, the guy who wrote the Powell Memo and who also wrote the First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti decision that in 1978 established corporate personhood and said that corporations can bribe politicians, and it's no longer a bribe, it's now called free speech. When he was inducted into the Supreme Court, Nixon put him on the Supreme Court in 71, when he was sworn in, the Federalist Society people gave him a black robe that was covered with the logos of a whole bunch of big corporations. And these were all corporations that actually that he had worked for. He was a corporate lawyer, had worked for Philip Morris, and it was the Philip Morris president who gave him the robe, and all the patches on it were Philip Morris brands. They own Kraft Foods, and they own all these. They own over 100 companies, I think. And but that chapter actually is kind of a rewrite of a chapter that was one of the 11 chapters in a book that I wrote back in 2008 called Rebooting the American Dream, which was kind of an agenda for the Obama administration. And there was a chapter in there called, legislators should wear NASCAR patches. And Bernie Sanders read that out loud into the congressional record on the floor of the Senate when he did that filibuster. So, yeah.
I know you've had a long relationship with Bernie Sanders. Who else do you think is operating at the national level who is somebody we should really be paying attention to?
My favorite senators are Bernie, Sheldon Whitehouse, and Elizabeth Warren. Those three are the most, Jeff. Brain fart. My two senators, Ron Wyden and Jeff, what's his name?
The only Jeff I can think of right now is Jeff Flake, and I know that's not who you're talking about.
Jeff Merkley. Yeah, it's Jeff Merkley. I'm sorry. It comes to you after a second.
Yeah. I'm there.
Those five are absolutely brilliant. Ron Wyden just proposed the legislation to expand the size of the Supreme Court, and Jeff Merkley is really a good, solid progressive, and he's been doing some great work. Neither of them have quite the national profile of because they've never run for president, of Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, and Sheldon Whitehouse, of course, has just been taking it to the Supreme Court for years now, and I think he, if Harris is elected, he should be given a job as the Attorney General. He should replace Merrick Garland.
I think somebody's got to replace Merrick Garland. I mean, he might have been a great Supreme Court jurist, but I've always thought that the person who's head of the DOJ needs a little bit of the prosecutor about them. And if he ever was a prosecutor, he certainly, I think, lost that DNA somewhere along the lines in his career.
That caution, which makes you a good judge.
Yeah, almost a both. In the beginning, I almost felt that it was a little bit of a both sidesing, which really disturbed me. And I don't feel quite that kind of disappointment now. But, a lot of the stuff that is being pursued against Donald Trump was there when Merrick Garland took over the DOJ, and pretty much for a full year or more, there was no action taken. And I don't pretend to know the inner workings of the DOJ. Maybe there are things going on that explain away that delay, but I sure don't understand it. I don't know if you have any insight into it.
I've heard a bunch of different stories, and sometimes they conflict. One of the stories that pops up frequently is that when Garland took over the Department of Justice, that it had already been severely corrupted by Bill Barr and Donald Trump, and they had packed the senior levels of the DOJ with, Republicans and right-wing shills and whatnot who just fought tooth and nail to prevent any kind of holding of Donald Trump responsible. On the other hand, I've also heard that Merrick Garland was afraid of being seen as partisan. He did not want to politicize the Department of Justice. He wanted to take it back to the pre-Trump days of, being an independent agency, and he thought that would hurt its appearance. That was a terrible miscalculation if that was the case. But I just don't know. I am not. He's been doing good the last couple of years, and God bless him. Keep going. But so many of Trump's crimes, for example, his Hatch Act violations. I mean, he should have been prosecuted for those just so nobody else would do them. I don't care if you get a conviction. Just file the damn papers.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I've said to the listeners all along. The goal isn't that we want a certain outcome, that Donald Trump has to go to jail, but the fact that the legal system calls him into a courtroom, holds his feet to the fire. That's the important part. That's our legal system working, and the whole nobody's above the law kind of an attitude. Whether, a jury or a judge convicts him or doesn't convict him, that's wonderful. But just the fact that he was forced to give an accounting of his behavior, that's, let's face it, Tom, if you and I did a third of what Donald Trump has done, we would be wearing orange jumpsuits right now. We'd be doing this from the prison radio station.
Yeah, and the DOJ went after Hunter Biden. Why haven't they gone after Jared Kushner? He walked off with $2 billion. I mean, what's up with that?
Yep. Hey, I want to let everybody know Tom is going to be at Frugal Muse Books on the 9th. That is in Darien, Illinois. Are you going to be doing a reading, a signing?
Yeah, all of the above, and please call first and let them know you're coming. In fact, we heard from them that they think that they're going to be swamped. So
okay.
I'm not trying to discourage anybody, but call and let them know first.
Okay, that's Frugal Muse Books in Darien, Illinois, and that same day you'll be able to hear Tom not only during the Thom Hartmann show, but also for part of the Joan Esposito show when he and the lovely Richard Chu conduct one of our famous panels, and have some fun with that. I know you always do. You bring a voice of reason to some of our more hyperbolic rantings. Those labor panels are a lot of fun, and it's great hanging out with a bunch of union guys. I'm a union guy. I'm in SAG-AFTRA. My dad, got into the middle class because of the machinist union. It was just that simple. So, I'm a fan of the unions. Me too. I'm also a SAG-AFTRA member. Have been for more years than I'm willing to admit right now. Thom Hartmann's new book is The Hidden History of the American Dream. It is out now. You should look for it. You should get it. And you should, if you can squeeze in to the Frugal Muse in Darien, you should go get your copy signed. Thank you, Mr. Hartmann. Always a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Joan. It's always such an honor to be on your program, and a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, you're very kind to say that.